The year was 1453. Across the known world, kingdoms and empires were rising and falling, new technologies were reshaping warfare, and ideas were spreading faster than ever before. But in the eastern Mediterranean, one city stood at the crossroads of history, a place that had survived 1,000 years of sieges, invasions, and calamities. Its walls were legendary, its faith unshakable, and its position unmatched. This city was Constantinople, the jewel of the Byzantine Empire. And in the spring of 1453, the fate of that jewel would be tested one last time. What happened in those fateful weeks did not simply mark the end of an empire, it reshaped the world. To understand why the fall of Constantinople is considered one of the greatest turning points in history, we need to begin with the story of the empire that had once been called the Second Rome. The Byzantine Empire was, in truth, the continuation of the Roman Empire in the East. When the western half of Rome crumbled under barbarian invasions in the 5th century, the eastern half endured. It preserved Roman law, Greek philosophy, and Christian faith for centuries. Its emperors considered themselves Romans. Its citizens thought of themselves as heirs of Caesar and Constantine the Great, and its capital, founded in 330 AD, was a city unlike any other. Built on the site of the ancient Greek colony of Byzantium, Constantinople occupied a strategic peninsula surrounded by water on 3 sides: the Golden Horn, the Bosporus Strait, and the Sea of Marmara. With massive triple-layered walls guarding its landward side, the city was considered nearly impregnable. For centuries, it had resisted Persians, Arabs, Bulgarians, and even Crusaders, standing tall as a fortress of Christianity in the East. Yet by the 15th century, Constantinople was a shadow of its former glory. Once a metropolis of 500,000, the city's population had dwindled to perhaps 50 or 60,000. Its once bustling markets were quiet, its great harbor nearly empty, and its treasury weak. The Byzantine Empire itself was reduced to little more than Constantinople and a few scattered territories. Powerful neighbors surrounded it. To the north, hungry Balkan states; to the west, ambitious Venetians and Genoese; and most dangerously to the east, the rising Ottoman Turks. For over 100 years, the Ottomans had expanded relentlessly into Anatolia and the Balkans, swallowing one Byzantine province after another. By the mid-15th century, the empire's survival was a miracle, but a miracle running out of time. The man who would decide Constantinople's fate was Sultan Mehmed II. Born in 1432, Mehmed ascended to the throne of the Ottoman Empire at just 19 years old. Intelligent, ambitious, and fiercely determined, Mehmed was unlike many rulers of his age. He was not content with simply preserving his empire. He dreamed of conquering Constantinople, a city that had eluded countless Muslim armies for centuries. Islamic prophecy, according to legend, had foretold that one day the city would fall to a great commander, and Mehmed was determined to fulfill that prophecy. In his eyes, capturing Constantinople was not just a military goal. It was a divine mission, the key to Ottoman dominance and the gateway to uniting East and West under his rule. On the other side was Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos, the last Byzantine emperor. A man of courage and resolve, Constantine was well aware of the peril his empire faced. He had little money, few soldiers, and almost no allies willing to come to his aid. But he had something just as powerful: a sense of duty. He saw himself as the guardian of a 1,000-year legacy, the last protector of Orthodox Christianity's most sacred city, and the defender of a people who looked to him in their final hour. Constantine was not naive. He knew the odds were against him, yet he resolved to fight, to resist to the last, and to preserve his empire's honor even if it cost him his life. The stage, then, was set for a clash of civilizations, Ottoman ambition against Byzantine endurance. But to truly appreciate the drama of 1453, we must understand why Constantinople mattered so much. Geographically, it controlled the passage between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. Whoever held the city controlled the flow of goods, trade, and naval power between Asia and Europe. Religiously, it was the heart of Eastern Orthodox Christianity, a symbol of resistance against Islam's advance into Europe. Economically, it was a vital link in the trade routes that connected East and West. And culturally, it was a city of breathtaking beauty, home to the Hagia Sophia, the greatest church of Christendom, and the spiritual pride of Byzantium. By 1453, both sides were preparing for the inevitable. Mehmed began gathering his forces, building massive cannons and assembling a navy larger than any before. Constantine XI scrambled for help, sending envoys to Rome and Venice, pleading for reinforcements and preparing his citizens for the coming storm. Yet aid from the West was slow, limited, and hesitant. The Great Schism of 1054 had divided the Catholic and Orthodox churches, and distrust still lingered. While a few Genoese and Venetian ships offered support, the great powers of Europe were either unwilling or unable to intervene in time. For the Byzantines, it was clear they would largely stand alone. As winter turned to spring in 1453, Mehmed's preparations were complete. He had gathered an army perhaps 80,000 strong, including elite janissaries, cavalry, and siege engineers. He had constructed one of the largest cannons the world had ever seen, designed by a Hungarian engineer named Orban, that could hurl enormous stone balls against the city's walls. He had assembled a fleet of over 100 ships to blockade the city from the sea. And most importantly, he had the confidence of youth, the faith of prophecy, and the resources of a vast empire at his command. On April 6, 1453, the Ottoman army encircled Constantinople. The siege had begun. Inside the city, Emperor Constantine rallied his people, assuring them that God would not abandon the Second Rome. Priests led processions through the streets, citizens prayed in the Hagia Sophia, and the defenders manned the legendary Theodosian walls, determined to resist as their ancestors had for centuries. The stage was set for one of history's most dramatic sieges, a contest not just of armies and cannons, but of faith, destiny, and survival. The question was no longer if the Ottomans would take the city, but when, and at what cost. The morning of April 6, 1453 marked the dawn of a siege unlike any the world had ever seen. Across the fields outside Constantinople, banners of green and red fluttered in the spring breeze, while the rhythmic beat of Ottoman war drums echoed through the hills. Tens of thousands of soldiers, cavalry, infantry, archers, and elite janissaries assembled under the command of Sultan Mehmed II, their encampment stretching for miles. To the citizens inside Constantinople's walls, the sight was overwhelming. An ocean of tents, a forest of spears, and the confident movements of an army that believed it was destined for victory. For those within the city, it was a terrifying reminder that they were hopelessly outnumbered. The defenders numbered perhaps 7,000 men, a fragile coalition of Byzantine citizens, foreign mercenaries, and a small but determined Genoese force led by Giovanni Giustiniani, a veteran commander from Genoa. Against an Ottoman force 10 times their size, they knew the odds. Yet, like their Emperor Constantine XI, they resolved to fight. The Theodosian walls, the legendary fortifications that had defended Constantinople for nearly 1,000 years, were the city's greatest hope. These walls, built in the 5th century, were marvels of engineering, a massive triple line of defense stretching over 4 miles across the landward side of the city. The first line was a deep moat, followed by an outer wall around 6 feet thick and 25 feet high, and finally the main wall, enormous, rising over 40 feet high and 15 feet thick, reinforced with towers at regular intervals. For centuries, these walls had resisted every enemy that dared to test them. Persians, Arabs, Bulgarians, and Rus all had failed to breach them. Even the Fourth Crusade in 1204, which had captured Constantinople, had required betrayal from within, not a direct assault. If the Byzantines had any hope of withstanding Mehmed's army, it was in these walls. But Mehmed came prepared. He had brought with him the most devastating weapon of the age, Cannons. Among them was the massive bombard designed by the Hungarian engineer Orban, a cannon so large that it required 60 oxen and hundreds of men just to move it. The gun could fire stone balls weighing over half a ton, capable of shattering stone fortifications like never before. Though slow to reload, sometimes only firing 7 times a day, it symbolized a new age of warfare, one where even the mightiest walls were no longer safe. Mehmed placed these cannons strategically before the city and began the relentless bombardment that would last for weeks. Inside Constantinople, life quickly changed under siege. Citizens awoke each morning to the thunder of cannons, the trembling of earth beneath their feet, and the crash of stone balls against their walls. Dust and rubble filled the air, while soldiers scrambled to repair breaches each night. Supplies grew scarce as Mehmed's navy blockaded the city from the sea, cutting off trade routes and reinforcements. Priests led processions through the streets, carrying icons of saints, while citizens crowded into churches, praying for divine intervention. Emperor Constantine himself moved among his people, encouraging them, reminding them that they defended not just their city but the legacy of Rome and the faith of Christianity. His words carried weight, but the fear of famine, collapse, and slaughter lingered in the hearts of many. Mehmed, meanwhile, demonstrated both cunning and ruthlessness. Realizing the Golden Horn, the harbor north of the city, was shielded by a giant chain that blocked enemy ships, he devised a daring plan. Over several nights, he ordered his men to haul 70 ships overland, rolling them on greased logs across the hills and valleys surrounding Galata, and then lowering them back into the water behind the chain. When dawn broke, the defenders were stunned to see Ottoman ships in the Golden Horn, an area they had thought safe. The maneuver not only shocked the Byzantines but also stretched their defenses thinner, as they were now forced to guard both land walls and sea walls. Several assaults followed. Ottoman troops launched repeated attacks against the walls, climbing ladders, ramming gates, and unleashing volleys of arrows and gunfire. The defenders, though heavily outnumbered, fought with ferocity. Greek fire, an ancient weapon that spewed flaming liquid, was deployed against Ottoman ships, setting the waters ablaze. Giustiniani and his Genoese soldiers proved invaluable, manning key sections of the wall and repelling wave after wave of attacks. At one point, the defenders even managed to set fire to several Ottoman siege engines, forcing Mehmed to rebuild them. Despite these victories, however, the strain was showing. Every day the cannons opened new cracks in the walls. Every night the Byzantines patched them with rubble and timber. The city was slowly being worn down. Diplomacy offered little relief. Constantine XI had sent appeals to the Catholic West months before the siege, pleading for aid. But Europe was divided. The papacy offered limited support, and a small fleet of Venetian and Genoese ships attempted to reach Constantinople, but most Western powers were distracted by their own wars. England and France were still recovering from the 100 Years' War. Spain was focused on the Reconquista. The Holy Roman Empire was fractured. Few were willing to send their armies to save a dying empire. In the eyes of many Western leaders, Constantinople was already lost. Still, hope flickered. On April 20, a small fleet of Byzantine and Genoese ships attempted to break through the Ottoman blockade. In a dramatic naval battle outside the city, the Christian ships managed to defeat a larger Ottoman fleet, delivering precious supplies and morale to the defenders. The victory was celebrated with joy inside Constantinople, as church bells rang and citizens cheered. But the moment of triumph was brief. Mehmed, enraged at the defeat, ordered brutal punishments for his admiral and renewed his efforts with even greater determination. For the Byzantines, the writing on the wall was becoming clear. Unless a miracle occurred, their city would not hold forever. As the days stretched into weeks, the tension mounted. Every cannon blast weakened the walls. Every failed assault drained the defenders. Yet the people of Constantinople endured. They patched the walls, prayed in their churches, and looked to their emperor, who refused to abandon them. Constantine XI even rejected offers to flee the city, declaring that he would rather die with his people than live in exile. For him, the defense of Constantinople was not simply about survival. It was about honor, faith, and the legacy of 1,000 years of Roman rule. As the siege wore on into late April and early May of 1453, the struggle for Constantinople entered a critical phase. The city's defenders had held out longer than many expected, but each passing day brought new dangers. Mehmed II, though only 21 years old, displayed a remarkable combination of patience and determination. He was not content to let the siege drag on indefinitely. He wanted to prove himself as the conqueror destined to claim the city. And so he began to escalate his efforts, unleashing both cunning strategies and relentless pressure on the exhausted defenders. One of the most remarkable turning points of the siege came not from the battlefield but from Mehmed's engineering genius. Having successfully hauled Ottoman ships overland into the Golden Horn, he had effectively flanked the Byzantines' naval defenses. Now, the once secure harbor of Constantinople was exposed to Ottoman attack. The Byzantine defenders scrambled to adjust, shifting men and resources to guard sea walls they had long thought safe. The psychological impact was just as devastating as the tactical one. If Mehmed could move ships across land, what else was he capable of? Inside the city, fear spread that no defense, no matter how strong, could resist the ingenuity and willpower of the young sultan. But it was not only ingenuity that defined this stage of the siege. It was also the sheer brutality of constant bombardment. The mighty Orban cannon, along with smaller but still formidable bombards, roared daily, pounding the Theodosian walls with terrifying force. The sound of these weapons was unlike anything the defenders had ever experienced. Whole sections of wall collapsed under their fire, towers cracked and crumbled, and stones weighing hundreds of pounds rained down upon homes and streets. At night, the Byzantines worked feverishly by torchlight to repair breaches with rubble, wood, and earth, but these makeshift repairs were fragile at best. Every sunrise brought the same routine: new bombardments, new destruction, new terror. It was a war of attrition, and the city's strength was wearing thin. Meanwhile, within Constantinople, the defenders showed extraordinary resilience. Led by Emperor Constantine XI and the Genoese commander Giovanni Giustiniani, they repelled repeated assaults on the walls. Giustiniani's Genoese troops, experienced in siege warfare, proved vital in plugging breaches and coordinating the city's defenses. Constantine himself fought alongside his men, moving from one section of the wall to another, encouraging soldiers, directing reinforcements, and sometimes taking up sword and shield to fight in person. For the citizens, their emperor's bravery was both an inspiration and a reminder of what was at stake: the survival of their city, their faith, and their way of life. But Mehmed was not without setbacks. Several major Ottoman assaults were repelled, often at heavy cost. In one instance, waves of Ottoman infantry attacked the walls with scaling ladders, only to be beaten back by defenders pouring boiling oil, hurling stones, and firing arrows down upon them. The defenders cheered as the attackers retreated in chaos, their losses mounting. Even the Janissaries, the elite Ottoman infantry, were unable to breach the walls in their early attempts. At times, it seemed as if the spirit of Constantinople itself was fighting back, refusing to yield despite overwhelming odds. Yet the strain on the Byzantines was undeniable. Food supplies grew dangerously low. With the Ottoman navy controlling the seas, imports of grain and other provisions became impossible. The population endured hunger, while disease began to spread in the cramped quarters of the besieged city. Morale wavered, though faith remained a powerful motivator. Priests led processions carrying relics through the streets, invoking divine protection. Legends circulated that the Virgin Mary herself would intervene to save the city, as many believed she had done in earlier centuries. Such stories gave hope, but they could not feed the hungry or repair the shattered walls. Outside the city, Mehmed attempted to undermine the defenders in other ways. His army dug tunnels beneath the walls, hoping to collapse them through mining. The Byzantines, however, detected these efforts and launched countermines. Fierce underground battles were fought in the darkness, with pickaxes, daggers, and firepots. The clash of steel and the cries of dying men echoed beneath the earth, hidden from the eyes of the city above. In these subterranean struggles, the Byzantines managed to hold their own, collapsing Ottoman tunnels and killing many sappers. Though a temporary victory, it could not mask the reality. The defenders were outmatched in numbers, weaponry, and resources. Despite the dire situation, a moment of hope came on May 3, when word spread that a large relief army was gathering in the west. Some in the city believed that fleets from Venice or the Papal States were on their way, ready to break the siege and rescue Constantinople. But as the days passed and no ships appeared on the horizon, this hope faded. The reality was harsh. Europe was preoccupied with its own conflicts and divisions. The schism between Catholic and Orthodox Christianity had left deep scars, and many in the West saw the Byzantine pleas as too little, too late. For the defenders, this abandonment was bitter, but it also steeled their resolve. They understood they would have to fight alone. As May wore on, Mehmed's determination grew. He knew prolonged sieges risked disease, desertion, and dwindling supplies for his own army. He also knew that his reputation was at stake. If he failed to take Constantinople, his authority as sultan could be questioned, and his dream of empire might collapse. So he intensified his efforts, preparing for one final, all-out assault. He ordered his cannons to pound the walls day and night without pause, weakening them to their breaking point. He rallied his soldiers with promises of wealth, glory, and the right to plunder the city if they succeeded. He invoked prophecy, declaring that it was God's will that Constantinople fall to him. The city, already battered and weary, braced itself for the inevitable storm. Inside Constantinople, Emperor Constantine gathered his people for what he knew might be their final days. He urged them not to despair, reminding them that they fought not only for their city but for their faith and their ancestors. On the eve of the final assault, he reportedly addressed his soldiers with stirring words, declaring that he would die defending the city rather than live in shame. His speech inspired many, even as despair gnawed at their hearts. Citizens filled the Hagia Sophia one last time, praying fervently for a miracle. Candles illuminated the great dome, and hymns echoed through the halls, as if the city itself was preparing to meet its fate. The turning points of the siege, Mehmed's ships in the Golden Horn, the relentless cannon fire, the desperate food shortages, and the failure of Western aid, had brought the struggle to its climax. Both sides understood that the end was near. For the Ottomans, victory promised eternal glory. For the Byzantines, defeat meant the end of a 1,000-year empire. As the final week of May dawned, the tension was unbearable. Every defender knew the next great assault would decide everything. And every Ottoman soldier knew that the prize of Constantinople was within their grasp. The stage was set for the last act of this epic struggle, the final assault that would change history forever. The final days of May 1453 carried with them an ominous weight. Within Constantinople, the citizens could sense the end drawing near. The thunder of Ottoman cannon shook the ground without pause day and night. Entire sections of the once mighty Theodosian walls lay in ruins, patched only by desperate repairs of wood, earth, and rubble. The defenders were exhausted, their numbers dwindling, their food nearly gone. Yet, despite all, a spirit of grim determination held fast. Emperor Constantine XI moved tirelessly among his soldiers, speaking words of encouragement, reminding them of their duty, and declaring that he would share their fate to the very end. In the streets and churches, people prayed fervently for divine intervention, filling the Hagia Sophia with candlelight and hymns. Some believed a miracle would save the city, as had happened in centuries past. Others quietly prepared for death. On the Ottoman side, Sultan Mehmed II was equally determined. He had poured every ounce of his will into this siege, and now, after weeks of bombardment and attrition, he was ready to end it once and for all. Failure was not an option. His cannons had done their work, His ships had penetrated the Golden Horn, and his army was restless with anticipation. On May 28, Mehmed gave the order. The next day there would be a final all-out assault. That night he addressed his troops. He promised them wealth and glory, declaring that the riches of Constantinople would belong to them if they took the city. He invoked faith as well, reminding them that they were fulfilling divine prophecy by capturing the great Christian stronghold. The soldiers cheered wildly, their voices echoing across the plain. Fires lit the Ottoman camps, drums beat in rhythm, and war cries rang out in the night, carrying fear into the hearts of those within the walls. That same evening, inside Constantinople, Emperor Constantine XI gathered his commanders and citizens for a final speech. According to chroniclers, he addressed them with solemn dignity. "My brothers, my comrades in arms, tomorrow we face the greatest test of our lives. Remember, we fight for our city, our families, our faith, and our freedom. I will not leave you. I will die with you." His words were met with tears, but also with renewed resolve. Many present knew these were the last words of a Roman emperor. Afterward, the people gathered in the Hagia Sophia one final time. Orthodox priests and Catholic clergy stood side by side, bridging the divide that had long separated their churches. Under the vast dome, citizens prayed together as one. The atmosphere was heavy with sorrow, but also with a strange sense of peace. By morning, the city would either be delivered by miracle or fall forever. Before dawn on May 29, the assault began. The Ottomans struck in 3 waves. The first wave was made up of irregular infantry, poorly trained but numerous, sent to exhaust the defenders. They surged forward with ladders and crude weapons, shouting battle cries as they stormed the battered walls. The defenders met them with arrows, stones, boiling oil, and sheer ferocity. Many of the attackers fell, trampled by their own comrades or cut down at the walls. The Byzantines cheered as they repelled this first assault, but they knew it was only the beginning. The second wave soon followed, better armed, more disciplined troops pressing the attack harder than before. They launched themselves at the breaches created by the cannons, hammering at the gates and swarming the walls. Again, the defenders resisted. Giustiniani and his Genoese men fought valiantly, reinforcing weak points and counterattacking where the walls were thinnest. Emperor Constantine himself was seen fighting with sword and shield, standing shoulder to shoulder with common soldiers. Once again the Ottomans were repelled, their dead littering the field. But the defenders were weary and their numbers were shrinking. They had fought bravely, but the storm was far from over. Then came the third wave, the Janissaries, the elite corps of Mehmed's army. These soldiers were the best-trained, most disciplined warriors of the Ottoman Empire. Dressed in distinctive uniforms, carrying curved swords and muskets, they advanced in terrifying silence before unleashing their assault. Unlike the previous waves, they pressed their attack with relentless determination. The defenders, already weakened from the earlier assaults, struggled to hold them back. Cannons roared, ladders clattered against the walls, and the clash of steel rang out across the city. At a critical moment, disaster struck for the defenders. Giovanni Giustiniani, the Genoese commander whose leadership had been crucial throughout the siege, was gravely wounded by a cannonball or arrow. His men, seeing their leader carried away, panicked. Many withdrew from the walls, leaving sections dangerously exposed. Emperor Constantine tried desperately to rally them, but the momentum had shifted. The Ottomans pressed harder, exploiting every gap and breach. Finally, a small postern gate known as the Kirkaporta was left unguarded or forced open amidst the chaos. Ottoman troops poured through, breaking into the city. At the same time, Janissaries stormed a major breach in the walls, overwhelming the exhausted defenders. Panic spread within Constantinople. The walls that had held for 1,000 years had finally been breached. Emperor Constantine XI, true to his word, refused to flee. Accounts differ on his exact fate, but most say that he threw off his imperial regalia, declaring, "The city is lost, but I live as a Roman," and charged into battle. Surrounded by enemies, he fought until he was cut down, his body never definitively identified. In that moment, the line of Roman emperors stretching back to Augustus was extinguished forever. The Ottomans poured into the city. Soldiers swarmed through the streets, looting homes, seizing treasures, and capturing citizens. Cries of terror filled the air as churches were ransacked and thousands were taken prisoner. The Hagia Sophia, once the greatest church in Christendom, became the site of unspeakable scenes as frightened citizens sought refuge inside, only to be captured when Ottoman troops forced their way in. Later, the great church would be converted into a mosque, its golden mosaics covered, its cross replaced with the crescent. By noon, Mehmed II rode triumphantly into the city through the gate of St. Romanus. He gazed upon the ruins, the bloodied streets, the fallen walls, and the mighty Hagia Sophia. For him, it was the culmination of destiny. He had achieved what no other sultan had, the conquest of Constantinople. From that day forward, he would be known as Mehmed the Conqueror. He declared the city the new capital of the Ottoman Empire, renaming it Istanbul. For the Byzantines, it was the end of a 1,000-year empire. For the Ottomans, it was the dawn of a new golden age. The final assault had lasted only a few hours, but its consequences would echo for centuries. The ancient city of Constantine, once the proud bastion of the Eastern Roman Empire, had fallen. The Second Rome was gone, and the world had changed forever. When the sun rose fully on May 29, 1453, the world was not the same as it had been the night before. Constantinople, once the beating heart of the Byzantine Empire, once the jewel of Christendom, was in ruins. Its walls, those legendary fortifications that had held firm for 1,000 years, were broken. Its streets were littered with the bodies of defenders and citizens. Its churches were emptied, its treasures plundered, and its people scattered, some slain, many taken into slavery. The city that had withstood wave after wave of invasion had finally fallen. For those who survived within its walls, the day was one of terror and mourning. For the Ottoman soldiers who had fought their way inside, it was a day of triumph and reward. And for Sultan Mehmed II, it was the fulfillment of destiny. Mehmed, only 21 years old, entered the city in triumph. He is said to have ridden to the Hagia Sophia, dismounted from his horse, and gazed at the vast dome of the greatest church in Christendom. There, he gave orders that the building be preserved but converted into a mosque. Its Christian mosaics were plastered over, its bells silenced, and the call to prayer was heard within its walls for the first time. Mehmed did not seek to destroy Constantinople completely. Instead, he sought to claim it as his own. He declared it the new capital of the Ottoman Empire, renaming it Istanbul. For him, this was not merely conquest, it was transformation. He envisioned Istanbul as the center of a great empire that would stretch across continents, bridging east and west. For the Byzantine world, however, the fall was nothing less than catastrophic. The empire that had traced its lineage back to Constantine the Great, that had stood as the heir of Rome for more than 1,000 years, was gone. With the death of Constantine XI, the line of Roman emperors came to an end. Chroniclers in Europe and the Orthodox world lamented the loss, calling it the end of an age. For centuries afterward, Orthodox Christians remembered May 29 as a day of mourning, and legends arose of how the city would one day be restored to its rightful rulers. But in the immediate aftermath, grief and despair dominated. The Byzantine world was shattered, and with it went a unique blend of Roman, Greek, and Christian traditions that had shaped the medieval world. In Western Europe, the news of Constantinople's fall sent shockwaves. Many were stunned that the great city, long seen as a bulwark of Christendom, had collapsed. Pope Nicholas V called for a new crusade to reclaim the city, but enthusiasm was muted. Europe was divided, weary of war and distracted by its own problems. Some leaders expressed outrage, others sorrow, but few took concrete action. In truth, the West had abandoned Constantinople long before May 1453, and many now regretted their inaction. The fall of the city was seen by some as divine punishment for the disunity of Christendom, especially the schism between the Catholic and Orthodox churches. Yet out of this tragedy came unintended consequences that reshaped the world. With the Ottoman Empire now controlling the vital trade routes through the eastern Mediterranean, European merchants faced new challenges. The Silk Road and spice trade, once flowing through Constantinople, were now in Ottoman hands. Prices rose, access narrowed, and European powers began to search for alternatives. It is no exaggeration to say that the fall of Constantinople pushed Europe toward the age of exploration. Within decades, Portuguese sailors were rounding the Cape of Good Hope, and in 1492, Christopher Columbus set sail westward, seeking a new path to Asia. In this sense, the fall of Constantinople indirectly opened the door to the discovery of the New World and the dawn of the modern era. The fall also had profound intellectual consequences. As the city collapsed, many Greek scholars fled westward, carrying with them manuscripts, knowledge, and traditions of classical learning. They settled in Italy and other parts of Europe, where their teachings helped ignite the Renaissance. The revival of Greek philosophy, science, and literature played a crucial role in reshaping European thought. Ironically, the destruction of Byzantium gave birth to a cultural flourishing in the West, one that would ultimately transform art, science, and politics across the continent. For the Ottomans, the conquest of Constantinople marked the beginning of their Golden Age. Mehmed the Conqueror set about rebuilding and repopulating the city, encouraging Muslims, Christians, and Jews to settle there. He saw Istanbul not just as a prize, but as a thriving capital for a vast empire. Over the next century, the Ottomans expanded further into the Balkans, North Africa, and the Middle East, becoming one of the most powerful empires in history. Istanbul grew into a magnificent metropolis, a symbol of imperial grandeur that endured for centuries. The legacy of the fall extended far beyond politics and trade. It symbolized the end of the medieval world and the beginning of something new. Historians often mark 1453 as the close of the Middle Ages, a date as significant as 476, when Rome itself had fallen in the West. Just as the fall of Rome had ushered in the medieval period, so too did the fall of Constantinople open the door to the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the age of global exploration. In many ways, May 29, 1453, was not just the end of Byzantium, it was the birth of the modern world. Even centuries later, the story of Constantinople's fall resonates. It is remembered not only as a military conquest but as a clash of civilizations, a struggle between old and new, between faiths and empires. It has inspired countless histories, legends, and works of art. Some view it as a tragedy, the destruction of a civilization that had preserved Roman and Christian traditions for a millennium. Others see it as a triumph, the crowning achievement of the Ottoman Empire. In truth, it was both. It was loss and creation, death and rebirth. It was one of those rare moments in history when the fate of a single city truly altered the course of the world. For the people who lived it, though, the fall was deeply personal. For the Byzantine citizens captured or slain, it was the end of their world. For the Ottoman soldiers celebrating victory, it was the fulfillment of their dreams. For Emperor Constantine XI, it was the fulfillment of his vow to die with his people. And for Sultan Mehmed II, it was the moment that secured his place in history. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 was not merely the conquest of a city. It was the end of one age and the beginning of another. It marked the final collapse of the Roman Empire, the rise of the Ottoman Empire, and the reshaping of global history. Its echoes are still felt today in the culture of Istanbul, in the traditions of Europe, and in the memory of both East and West. The story of that spring, of the walls that fell and the empire that died, remains one of the most powerful and defining tales of human history.